My name is Felipe Filomeno. I am associate professor in political science at UMBC, and I'm also associate director of the Center for Social Science Scholarship. Today we have an alumni panel with Jonathan Feng and Leslie McNamara. We were supposed to have Cheryl not with us here, but she found out just yesterday that she was called for jury duty today. So she can't be here today, and I'm sorry for that. But we have here Jonathan Feng, who is a government analyst at Thomson Reuters Special Services. He's a graduate from UMBC, where he earned a degree in history and another one in information systems. So a cool interdisciplinary education that Jonathan had here. And Leslie McNamara, who is an analyst at the U.S. Government Office of Accountability Office. And she's a graduate from our history department. So I will pose a series of questions to our two panelists. Each of them will answer one question, then another question. And after that, we'll have breakout sessions. So I will divide the participants in two groups. One will be facilitated by Jonathan. The other one will be facilitated by Leslie. And in those breakout sessions, they will give you an example, an illustration of the kind of work that they do on a daily basis as part of their work. Okay, and in those breakout sessions, you will also have a chance, the students who are here will have a chance to speak directly to our panelists and ask them questions about their work. And, you can also take advantage of them and ask about their experience at UMBC and if they have any career advice to give you, which I'm sure they do. So my first question for our panelists is, what are your duties and responsibilities at work? So can you briefly describe your position to us? And let's start with Leslie.
Sure. Well, I'm an analyst on the healthcare team at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. My responsibilities revolve around planning and conducting reviews of federal healthcare policies and programs. So most of my work has been in the Medicaid program. My duties really vary depending on the stage of the research project. So in the early stages, I'm typically doing a lot of background reading. I'm trying to just getting background information about the topic that I'm working on. It's pretty common at GAO in the analyst position to be working on a job where you don't have any background knowledge. The types of materials that I typically read, they can be academic articles, they can be prior GAO reports, or publications from health policy organizations like the Kaiser Family Foundation. In the research and analysis phase of the job, I'm pretty much responsible for interviewing a lot of different organizations. We always will interview the federal agency. With healthcare, that's typically the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We may also interview Medicaid officials from different types of states, and we may also be interviewing different stakeholder organizations. So we may be interviewing organizations that represent payers, insurers, providers, or advocacy organizations. It really kind of depends on the job. And so when I get to after I do these interviews, I'll review the information from the interviews, and I will also be reviewing agency documentation. These are documents that may be or may not be publicly available. They're usually describing the agency's internal policies or procedures. For instance, on my last job, we reviewed a lot of guidance documents that CMS issued to states on implementing different COVID-19 related policies to the Medicaid program. And when I'm reviewing it, I'm really looking for themes and patterns in the information. I'm looking for any gaps or inconsistencies. In terms of themes and patterns, if I interviewed, say, 5 state Medicaid offices, I'm looking at these interviews and trying to see what What are the commonalities? What are the similarities? When it comes to agency documentation, a lot of it is about what are they doing and what are they not doing. And with the Medicaid program, it usually revolves around what are they requiring states to report and what are they not requiring states to report. And then the final stage, based on my analysis, I will start writing a draft summarizing my findings. And this will go in a section of the report that we will be issuing publicly. I will also be providing a source for every sentence in that draft, which will then be reviewed by a third partier. And so that's really, on a very high level, the typical types of duties, not only in my position, in my job, but generally within GAO in the analyst position.
Thank you. How about you, Jonathan?
Hi. So, so I'm a government analyst over at Thomson Reuters Special Services. So my duties and responsibilities at work are primarily providing processing of data for our clients and also doing some social science and technical research as well. So our customers are primarily in the national security space, defense, law enforcement, that such. Although we do have customers also in the other parts of the government. In addition, we also collaborate with some educational institutions and also some private businesses as well. And a lot of the work that we do does run the gamut. We do have, again, I work on a couple of very fairly data centric, data heavy efforts for the company. But in addition to that, we also have efforts and types of work that are more geared towards more qualitative research and qualitative analysis. And our end products, again, are tailored towards that. A lot of the times our products are written reports. Sometimes they are regular reports that we deliver once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, or we also do long form deep dive white papers as well. In some cases, we also do some other research regarding processes for our government clients as well. And so, yeah, it's just that due to the nature of our company's access to a lot of the resources and data that our parent company has, Thomson Reuters has, we are able to leverage that into a wide variety of different analytical products for for a diverse set of customers for business.
Thank you. And as you might remember from your time at UMBC as an undergrad, when professors teach research methods, how to do research, we usually talk about identifying a problem that has not been answered yet in the literature by previous scholars. We collect data about that problem, then we analyze that data and then come up with an answer or a solution, right? So that's the typical research cycle. How does that look in your work? And I know that Leslie, your previous answer already covered some of that, but if you can give us any additional detail, that would be great. So
yeah, so I'm going to give you an example from a report that I worked on that was actually just published in September. First, our work at GAO is generated through Congress. We will receive either it is through a request letter from a congressional committee, or it is through a legal mandate, which means it's written into law. So a lot of our work with COVID-19 was mandated to us through the CARES Act, which was one of the initial COVID-19 relief bills. So we received a request to look at temporary changes that CMS has allowed for states to use to their Medicaid programs in order to respond to COVID-19. These are changes that are not typically allowed in the Medicaid program. There's a wide variety, but the overarching goal was to enable states to continue operations, to be able to continue to provide services to beneficiaries while limiting in-person contact. And so in terms of identifying a problem, sometimes with our work, and we didn't know if there was a problem, but we shaped a neutral research objective. You can think of this as a research question focused on CMS, and it was to look at the extent that CMS was evaluating and monitoring the effects of these changes. And in terms of data collection analysis, this is our attempt to answer that question. We interviewed CMS officials. We reviewed a lot of guidance documents from CMS, some publicly available, some not. A lot of these documents were guidance from CMS to states on implementing the changes. We also looked at documents related to whether state reporting requirements to CMS. And based on our analysis and going to proposing a solution or explaining an explanation, we often do this at GAO. It usually is demonstrated when we issue, if we issue a recommendation to the agency. And so essentially what we do is we compare what we find to particular criteria, which is essentially a standard of what should be done. And essentially what we found in our analysis was that CMS was mostly providing guidance to states on implementing the changes, but they were very much not really monitoring the effects of these changes. And it was very unclear to us at that time if there was a plan for evaluating these changes. And as such, we issued 2 recommendations to the agency. One, that they should develop a plan to monitor the effects of these changes, and secondary, that they should evaluate these changes after the public health emergency.
Thank you. And so I have many students present here. So can you just tell them a little bit about what the Government Accountability Office?
Yes. I apologize.
It seems like a lot of compliance work, right? From what I understand.
Yeah. So essentially, what we do, we essentially act as the research and investigative arm of Congress. We are in the legislative branch. And as I said, our work is generated through Congress. We have 15 mission teams. I work on the healthcare team, but we have teams that cover physical infrastructure, education, workforce, immigration, homeland security. It really runs there's a lot of variation. But again, our work, essentially, when we get a request letter from a congressional committee, and kind of to give you a sense, most of our work is through a request. They will send us a letter, and it may be pretty broad of what they want us to look at. And essentially what we do is we really generally review federal programs and policies. We review anything that receives federal funding. So in the healthcare team, that is Medicaid, Medicare, healthcare coverage for veterans and the military, and topics like prescription. We've issued reports on prescription drug spending. We also do public health. COVID-19 has been a huge, pretty much all that we've been working on since the pandemic in healthcare. And our overall goal as far as an agency is we really strive to deliver objective and fact-based information to Congress. Our reports are publicly available, and we really aim to improve the efficiency of government. And that is, we sometimes issue recommendations to an agency, and sometimes we issue recommendations to Congress. Those are really centered around ways that they can improve their policies, their procedures, their operations, and how they can use federal funds more appropriately and more efficiently.
Thank you. And Jonathan, before you talk about the research cycle in your work, can you also give us a brief overview of the company that you work for? When we hear the word Reuters, we usually think a news agency. So can you please clarify that?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, so I work for Thomson Reuters Special Services. It's the government consulting arm or subsidiary of Thomson Reuters. Everyone, so as you stated, Felipe, that everyone has heard of Reuters news agency and such, all the global reporting they do. In addition to that, I guess sort of the quote unquote Thomson side of things, they do a lot of, it's been a lot of financial data and information. So and just kind of just like preview to the breakout session, they do have some tools that speak to that. They have a tool that that addresses a lot of financial intelligence data, a lot of information about markets both domestic and globally. Also they have products that draw the public records data as well. That's being used by a lot of law enforcement agencies and also national security space as well. Westlaw, for example, if anyone in the audience has either gone through law school or is thinking about going to law school, that is one of it's a database for legal research and other sources of information. Yeah, so those are some of the other things that the Thomson Reuters company does, and so we draw a lot upon those resources and external ones as well, based on customer need and other efforts that we're working on to do the work that we do. Leading based off of that, our research questions are often brought to us by the government customer. This is how the government contracting. I'm not going to go through the whole nitty gritty fun cycle of government contracting and how that works, but generally speaking, we do the government customer has a question that they would like answered, and usually and it's usually one, and usually our company doesn't just there are a lot of companies that do a lot of staff augmentation roles within the government, but we're primarily focused towards asking the tough questions within government. So the government comes to us with a question about a specific issue. So I think this is publicly discussed. Like, there were a lot of issues regarding COVID-19 fraud. So people who were either try to defraud the government. I think of payments as stimulus payments and stuff like that. And so we were tasked with by some government customers to look into that. And also, there were also vendors of who were selling counterfeit personal protective equipment, or PPE. We, as our government customer, tasked us also with looking at that as well. So oftentimes they come to us with a question. Sometimes they even come to us with a particular data set to address that question. So depending on what they come to us with and how fleshed out their question is and how specifically they want us to answer, we have some sort of degree of freedom in how we address that issue. So part of again, and as I stated before, we just don't do staff augmentation. We do a very unique set of consulting for the government. So in addition to a person that we have that brings their own expertise, their own knowledge about a particular issue or issues, we also provide support in forms of technology and also the data that comes from our parent company, Thomson Reuters. And so all that combined, we use all those various sources of information and the expertise of the people that we have in our company to address the government's question.
Great. And when we were putting this panel together, we wanted a diversity of disciplines and also a diversity of careers or workplaces, right? So Leslie works for the government, Jonathan works for a private company, and I am wondering how that affects the kind of research that you do and how you present that research. I am a community-based scholar, so I do research in communities in Baltimore. So sometimes I publish my research in an academic journal, and that takes a certain form and language. When I am presenting my research to a government agency that has collaborated with me or to a nonprofit, then that usually looks different. It's more in the form of a report. The language is more accessible. It's more focused on, specific findings, and, I use, you can present them in a bullet point list. It's something more less jargony and more straightforward than an academic journal. So I'm wondering how that looks for you, right? So considering your clients, how do you think that affects the kind of research that you do and how you present it? Let's start with Leslie.
Yeah, so a lot of this is, I think, very reflective of GAO as an agency and from an organization. And a lot of that I've already kind of discussed, giving you a broad overview about what our agency does. In terms of topic areas, it really ranges, but obviously a lot of it is determinant on the interests of the Hill. If it's a request, which that can change. And I will just say that a lot of times, if it's a request letter, a lot of it, the question or area can be very broad. And then we work within GAO to narrow that scope. In terms of methodologies, it just depends on the job, just like it would depend on your research project. We do qualitative and quantitative. I have mostly, as I mentioned, worked on Medicaid, and most of that has been qualitative. It's been interviews, agency documentation, but within GAO, we do surveys, we do focus groups. Sometimes we will put an expert panel together. Sometimes we do site visits. We haven't done a lot with COVID, but I know in healthcare that's pretty typical with VA work, where they'll go to actual VA facilities. Now, in terms of presenting, yeah, very much so. Obviously, I said our reports are publicly available because we view Congress, the Hill, as our client, and also because they are publicly available. Our reports are written. We strive to make them understandable to a plain reader. So if you're not a healthcare expert, or you can understand it, and a lot of times, it's also because our clients don't have a lot of time. They need to know what's the most important information that they need to know. So our reports are structured in a way. If you actually go on the GAO website, you can see a lot of this. Like, we have a highlights page, which is a one-page summary. In terms of writing, they're written clearly, they're written concisely, they're written deductively, they're written bottom line up front. I personally think that this is very common in the world of public policy, in my experience, even prior to GAO. We don't need an essay, we don't need a story. What do we need to know? And that bottom line information is up front, because you can be giving, even in other types of organizations, you can be giving this to someone, they don't have time to read a 20-page paper. And it's very, it's very different than academia. And the other part of it is, a lot of times you're translating technical language to a non-technical audience, and that can be really difficult. But that is a key part of what we do. We also will use, sometimes in our reports, we will use figures, we'll use tables, we'll use graphics, particularly if we're trying to convey a complex topic where it's honestly going to be much more easier to communicate that visually than through writing it. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Yes, so I honestly echo a lot of what Leslie says, because mostly a lot of our customers are government customers. So again, the same things. Yeah, got to be brief, to the point. Bottom line up front. Most of our, not all of our written products for the government or our customers rather have an executive summary, so that way, whenever they can just look at that, just get the gist of what the we're trying to say, and also just get the quick answer to the initial question that they asked. And yeah, we tackled problems in a similar way to how Leslie described it. We do have to take very complex and technical issues, and looked at in a sometimes a very complex and technical way, and be able to distill it for a decision maker within the government in order to inform a decision that that person has to make eventually, as in their role within the government or in private industry in some instances. In addition, we also do some work regarding with academic centers and other research centers as well. So again, it's not specifically answering a question, but perhaps lending our efforts or some resource that we have to their ongoing research as well, and also just establishing that perhaps not answering the question right now, but demonstrating that we can answer it in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. I will now pass on to the breakout sessions. We will have 20 minutes, more or less 10 minutes for the panelists to give you an example of. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some interesting sneak peeks into what your future work might look like after you graduate from UMBC. And I hope you're also convinced that you do have to study and dwell in research methods classes at UMBC so that you can do this work, so that you're prepared to do this work in the future outside of the university. I would like to encourage you as well to check the website of the Government of Accountability Office and of Thomson Reuters so that you can learn more about the organizations where Leslie and Jonathan work for. And thank you very much for our panelists, Jonathan and Leslie, for being here in service to their alma mater. So welcome back. And do we have any other questions for the panelists? Last call for questions. You can raise your hand. Actually, we're not on Blackboard. You can now raise your hand. Well, you can raise your hand actually here on WebEx too.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I had a question for Miss Leslie. So I had a question about like the letters that you were talking about. So how long do you think that it would take for the letters to be approved by like certain agencies in Congress when you like send it or make it?
You're muted, Leslie.
I'm sorry. You mean the request letters that we receive from Congress?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So they send that to us. We have, and these are publicly available documents. But we have sort of an internal process. We have another in terms of, I mean, I don't know how long it takes for us to receive it, but I'm sure not long. But we sort of have an internal process in terms of prioritization of jobs. And as I've said, with healthcare, the last year and a half, it's been COVID all the time. It's just took priority, but you should be able to, those are publicly available. They may be posted on the committees, on different committees' websites. I've seen sometimes where when they send it, it'll make the news, maybe make a news, maybe be an article. It depends on what it is, especially if it's current affairs. But yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Thanks.
Any other question? Okay, and I would also like to remind our students that you can develop your research skills not only through taking research methods classes, but also through independent study that you can do supervised by an instructor, research internships with professors. You can get an undergraduate research award to do your own research and get money for your own research. And you can present your research at ORCAD, which is our annual undergraduate research and creative achievement day, in which undergraduate students present their research and creative product. So make sure you check out those opportunities to develop your research skills and prepare for the job market in the future. So thank you again to our two panelists for being here. Thank you for all the students who participated, and everyone have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.